Welcome to Align and Embrace, where over 50 years of combined clinical experience meet a commitment to cultural humility and social change.
In this episode, learn along with the Align and Embrace team as our guest clinician, Vanessa Solis, answers questions and discusses her experience with using EMDR and Brainspotting for treating trauma.
Okay, so welcome again, Vanessa. We are happy to have you here. And thank you again for sending that webinar, because most of these questions you have already answered. But I do have a couple of questions to ask. Before I do want to ask those questions, if any of you did have time to review the webinar, do you have any additional questions on EMDR or Brainspotting for her? And if not, that's okay. So I noticed something that you did not answer, and I was still curious about. So I know you talked a lot about how EMDR and Brainspotting, those individual therapies, and how, they are very helpful for your clients and the differences between them. But a couple of questions that we had was, where did you learn this type of therapy? Is it allowed in different states? And are there certificates or online programs that you can utilize to become, so you can serve your community using these types of therapies?
Yeah. First of all, I'll say that it's lovely to be here with all of you, and to get these questions and this lovely presentation format made me feel so special. You all are so lovely. So thank you for that. And the fact that I mentioned Raquel, the webinar, and the fact that you all were able to view it on short notice. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I would have, if all the brain cells were firing correctly last week, not being sick, I probably would have allowed for more time for that. But I'm glad you all got the chance to view that, because when I saw these questions, I was like, these are already answered somewhere else, and it might be helpful to kind of curb time for us today, because I know I'm the type of person that can talk till the end of time about a lot of things, so I'll do my best to cover all the questions. So thank you, Amari, for kind of giving context of what might still be lingering in terms of questions here, in terms of Brainspotting. So I learned Brainspotting from a trainer who was trained by David Grand, who is the founder and developer of Brainspotting himself. So what's interesting about David Grand is that he was actually a trainer of EMDR, an EMDR therapist and EMDR trainer himself. He actually developed his own advanced training of EMDR, and he actually kind of discovered, if you will, Brainspotting during an EMDR session. So what happened is he was having an EMDR session with a client who was an ice skater, and for some reason she couldn't land this triple loop for whatever reason. Excuse me, I'm going to close my door because there is noise outside. Okay, hopefully that's a little bit better. She couldn't land this triple loop for some reason, and it was messing up her, performance. Her performance every time she went to, do her whole little, I shouldn't say little, her whole performance. She couldn't land this particular move. And so he was doing his usual EMDR practice on her, and something compelled him to keep his finger, because EMDR is done the old school ways to do it like this with your fingers, the bilateral movement, and something had him hold his finger in one spot. And then he discovered that holding your eye position in one place and allowing the process to unfold, turns out there was all kinds of, other issues and traumas and things that, they had either explored but not fully, or hadn't explored yet. Lots of stuff from her trauma, from her childhood, stuff that was completely unrelated to, obviously, an ice skating move, right? And turns out being able to kind of process all of these things, that she hadn't been able to before, that she was able to do during Brainspotting, allowed her to land that move the next time she did it and every time after, which was pretty amazing. So EMDR and Brainspotting, like mentioned before, they're closely connected, as one was developed from a session from the other, but they are, completely different modalities. So to answer the question, I learned from a trainer, and have learned from David Grand himself. There is a whole website, brainspotting.com, that you can visit, where you can, there are a number of trainings, phases 1 through 4, as well as many advanced trainings, specialty trainings, in order to get like specific modality techniques, such as Brainspotting with children and adolescents, Brainspotting particular for folks who experience some more severe levels of dissociation, Brainspotting in groups, Brainspotting in a lot of things. So there's a lot of advanced training. So if you want to check out brainspotting.com. Is it allowed in different states? Allowed in different states. I'm going to need more help in this for this question. Allowed in different states, meaning as a modality?
Can it be practiced in different states or all states?
Can it be practiced in different states? Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of, and what's amazing about David Grand, as a human and the developer of Brainspotting, is one of his kind of things that he says is that there's no turf when it comes to healing. So he's actually taught folks that are other types of healers outside of therapists, physical therapists, teachers, coaches, other types of health professionals, excuse me, to practice Brainspotting. So if you are if it's within the legal context of the profession, or that your service you're providing, then yes. So for instance, if I were coaching, using Brainspotting in a coaching capacity across states, then that would be permitted. But as we know, when it comes to mental health and clinical work, in our country, that is based on the different states' laws that prohibit, often prohibit. Well, during COVID, there was some reciprocity happening because it was the state of emergency, or during the height of COVID, I should say, because it's still very much alive and well. That so if we're using it in a therapeutic context, then it depends on the state and the state's particular laws. But if you're using it in a different capacity, right, such as coaching, then it is permitted. Does that answer the question?
That is helpful. And Dr. Alexander also has her hand up.
I see that.
Okay. I just have a quick question, and I was curious to know, what are your thoughts in regards to this modality and using it for folks who have experienced racialized trauma?
That is a wonderful question. I think it, the thing about Brainspotting again, and EMDR, Brainspotting in particular, because the process is so client-led, because that, the framework and the foundation and the theory applied to Brainspotting is that, that the clinician, the practitioner, holds this sense of this, what we call the uncertainty principle, where there's no way that we can truly know what exactly is happening in that big, beautiful brain, universe of a brain that's happening in the client's mind. But we stay grounded and trusting that the client and their system knows what's best for, knows what's best and knows what to do in order to heal itself. And again, and that's from the most empowering way possible. So when we have clients who have, experienced racial trauma, right, in the context of the society and the world that we live in, right, pieces around power, pieces around choice, pieces around, having, ability to, to maneuver, freely, right? Like to be able to give that context in treatment in a healing context, I believe is, so powerful, right? To be able to hold a container where a client can truly be trusted and held in their process, without, the practitioner inserting their own brilliant intervention in the middle of it, right? Without the practitioner kind of interrupting and asking some question, that might be relevant, but might kind of throw off the client's process if they are, truly kind of getting in there and really experiencing what it's like to be a person of color, in the world, in this country, being a person of color who just experienced, whatever individual, trauma they did experience as a result, and everything, and everything in between. I think that, coming from an approach that, again, allows for and values the client leading the process, is, one of the more empowering ways to heal. And that's why we use it. And that's why I love it so much, with clients, because I found that, a lot of clients who, have tried traditional talk therapies, right? Which there's no shade to traditional talk therapies, because they work for a reason. They've been around for a long time for a reason, but, and they're effective. But to be able to, again, have a more of a balance in the power dynamic, essentially, right, of what happens in that treatment, and allowing the client to take the lead, allowing the client to, be centered, not the therapist's, brilliance and wisdom in it, right? That, did I answer the question?
So, and I've been trained in EMDR. I really like it. I've also been heart-centered hypnotherapy, and there's some basic tenets I think that are very similar with that.
Yeah,
and I do agree. I mean, I think it's how it should go most of the time. But to your point, the power differential, I think it is diffused a lot, in this process. I have had people though who, and maybe I'm still a novice at EMDR because I was trained in, traditionally I would think it'd be easier to do it in person, but now what's for sure heart-centered hypnotherapy. But EMDR, I know you can do it virtually. And I was wondering, from your perspective, do you think there is a difference in the effectiveness, whether it's in person or not? And what have you noticed as far as the differences if you're doing, I don't even know if you're, if you're doing it in what particular context, but I know for me, that was something that I found to be interesting, learning it online, in the middle of the pandemic, and then starting to utilize as an intervention. And knowing it's not for everybody, but I think it is a very good resource to utilize, especially with what you're talking about. And I was also just thinking about the racialized trauma, because I've been seeing that come up so much lately. And I just got back from Maui. I was supporting the wildfires. We had a disaster behavioral health response. So that was really interesting. And I was seeing a lot of, re-traumatization just percolating throughout the entire community. It was very interesting. So anyway, that's kind of what got me there. And I also was just curious about the context when you're doing EMDR and Brainspotting. How does that work if you're virtual versus in person? Meaning, like, do you see a greater opportunity for effectiveness in one context versus the other? Because I've only done it virtually.
Yeah, I actually only learned, I was trained in Brainspotting virtually myself. And so, like, when you get trained in something online or and then like you're practicing, in the other context. Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's kind of like, whoa, this is different. I will say that I don't think that there is a how should I say, or how did you put it? Because I think I kind of said it in I said it before, like, or I addressed it before in the webinar, right? That like the efficacy of the modality itself is not compromised, whether it's online or in person. I think it really depends on the human, honestly, right? And the context of, like, here in the Bay Area, it takes freaking forever to get anywhere, right? And so my clients are like, I am happy to do my trauma therapy from the comfort of my own home and my pajamas with my snacks next to me. It's great, right? While other people might be like, I don't actually want to do that. I want to be out. I've been in my home forever, like because of COVID, we were locked up forever. I want to be able to kind of go outside, separate myself, and come into a different context, a different space where this is like my space where I kind of let go and unwind, if you will, in this like kind of therapy room with you. And liking, I mean, I think there is something about the energetic exchange that happens in person that just like isn't which is, I shouldn't say isn't as, it's different than online. But I think it honestly depends on the human preference. Because I can say both. I've had wonderful, powerful experiences, both online and in person. So I wouldn't say, that one is, and I don't think that's how you asked it either. One is better than the other, but like it just in terms of the differences, I think, online, I know there was a lot of worry online. I'm even for myself, when the pandemic first set in and we were all as therapists who were practicing in person, just all had to move online, over the course of a couple of days. And I remember being really worried about it, about, what was going to happen, how we'd be impacted, how, if my clients were going to get the care that they deserved. And being able to kind of consult with other consultee or other consultants and folks who have been, I mean, because online therapy also wasn't like a new thing before the pandemic, like Zoom wasn't, was a thing before the pandemic, right? And so there were lots of people that were like, yo, it's fine. We've been doing therapy, online for a long time. You can do it like this. There's different ways you can do it. There's programs you can use, there's different ways that you can do it. Clients can, as long as they, are clinically appropriate for doing something online, meaning they're not like super at risk for self-harm or, or anything like that, they're good to go.
Yeah, I think it was a major paradigm shift, that we all had to make when pandemic. I gave up my office because it was like, it makes no sense to have an office, for me at the moment. And I also think, to your point, I think with everything, it's like really person specific and what, is going to be most effective for them. Yeah. I'm also wondering, like, we have new clinician or, rising clinicians, master's level students. When you learned EMDR and Brainspotting, and I apologize, I was not able to check out the webinar, but I will go back and watch it. So if you answered some of this, my apologies. But I do think for the recording, just what we're putting out there, it's helpful. But what would you say, as far as conceptually grasping EMDR? Because I feel like, again, with my experience, the more you do it, of course, the better you're going to be at it. But also I run into some obstacles. And, when I was doing it, like I had somebody who was over intellectualizing the process from her perspective. And she got caught up, like felt like there should be more to it, or, you know what I mean? Like, I was just wondering if there's one thing as far as a nugget that you could give us in regards to any place where you may have like ran into an obstacle and how you have overcome that, or refine or tweak your skills with delivering these two interventions.
Yeah. So again, because the two of these modalities, they're brain-based modalities, they're body-based modalities, right? So they intentionally access the parts of the brain that traditional talk therapies don't, right? And so you access the parts of the parts of self that might not yet be totally healed. So when I get to a stuck point with a client, right? Like, where a client just can't get past this certain thing, or can't, having trouble really kind of working through this. I like to think of it as that, like, we are pushing up against something, against like a true turning point in the healing, because it's something there that they're, if folks are familiar with the IFS model, different parts work, right? That their protective part, right? That the part of them that is survived by holding on to this, piece, this thought or belief, or this piece of it's this sense of self or whatever, right? That's pushing up against this new learning, this new awakening, this new awareness that they're having about themselves, right? Like, like that it can be that we can think of it as, again, that we're on to something, right? And that we just need to kind of, lean into it, have patience with our clients, knowing again that these modalities are really using what the brain and body already know what to do to heal. And so kind of like patience with the process, patience with, the client, and sure, getting consultation here and there about, the mechanics of EMDR for what you're describing. But noticing where those stuck points are, because it means we're on to something. It means like the way that, we all learn how to survive, in different ways. Sometimes it's helpful ways, sometimes it's not so helpful ways, right? And so when we kind of start pushing up against, against that for clients, right? To me, it means we're on to something, like we're going the right direction. So keep going, but in terms of course, in the way, that is, that is comfortable and safe for clients, and held in a container for them during the process. How's that sound? Okay. Cool. Those are great questions. Thank you for those. Anything else? Oh, sure. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just curious. So I know you mentioned like you do EMDR and brain spotting with a large variety of different concerns that people bring in or types of trauma. I'm curious if you have any experience with, or if you recommend this type of therapy for like people with chronic pain, or just in general, like trauma around experiences with like physical pain, because you mentioned that it's both brain and body. And I think that's like a huge component there. So I was just wondering if you had any insight on that.
Yeah, this is kind of reminding me of a question that we get a lot, that I addressed in the webinar as well, is which one is best for this particular issue, right? And the answer is similar to what I'll mention right now, is that you definitely want, because there definitely are, providers that specialize and have advanced trainings in chronic pain and chronic illness. And yes, I don't know, I'm sure there is of an advanced training in EMDR for chronic pain and illness, but I know that there certainly is one for brain spotting, because they get into, the science behind that, like pain is actually, a signal that goes to the brain, even though we think it's like the cut on our hand, but it's actually our brain telling us that the cut hurts on our hand, right? And so like kind of getting into like, more of the science behind it, if you will. And so to answer your question, yes, there are advanced trainings in brain spotting for sure that I know of, where they go really deep into more of the scientific aspects of that. I personally myself, because I don't specialize in chronic pain, haven't seen I have worked with clients with chronic pain, but that's not my particular niche or expertise. Does that answer your question, Shyla?
Yeah, thank you. That's great. And I think that's such an important distinction you made, that it is in the brain, and especially with certain conditions that fire up the nerves and the neurons, it's, more about the brain and the connection of the brain and the body. So yeah, interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Jack, I see your hand up. Now I'm seeing the hands.
Yeah, so in my past, I did a project where I interviewed a lot of clinicians, and what came up in one session, I recall directly, was they recommended a client do, talk therapy before they could even broach EMDR. It was a person had severe domestic abuse trauma, and so they recommended like talk therapy for so long that the person never even wound up getting EMDR, and that steered them away. I was just wondering your viewpoint on that.
In terms of why that might have been recommended, or
do you think that's ever necessary, or do you disagree with that standpoint?
I suppose I disagree, because I don't think that anybody needs to do talk therapy before engaging in EMDR, because EMDR is a protocoled, both Brainspotting and EMDR. If you're engaging in therapy, there are parts that are simply, going to be part of what we're doing, such as the intake, right? Like, you're not jumping in, first session with a client and being like, hey, what is your deepest, darkest trauma? And we're going to get going in it right now before we even know each other, right? So there's a whole layer of history taking, rapport building, and EMDR, there's preparation, we call it resource building, right? And that involves talking, right? And I think that sometimes folks who are learning EMDR and/or brain spotting, and clients too, right? Anyone who's learning about EMDR kind of have the sense that like EMDR is this thing where you're just like jump in and you go and you do the things, and the magic wand does its thing and your trauma is something of the past, when really it's a process, right? It's a process in order for client and clinician to feel prepared to conduct trauma therapy, which a lot of it, again, is relationship building. You can't just jump into, someone's deepest, darkest, traumas if you don't even have a relationship, because it's arguably the most important, factor of a therapeutic relationship, or of therapy itself and the outcomes, is the relationship between therapist and client. Great question, Jack. Australia?
Yeah, excuse me. So I guess going along to that, I do want to say thank you for explaining that. And Jack, thank you for asking that, because I do commonly hear that EMDR is such a intense therapy process that they would prefer people to at least try talking before going into it, because of the intensity of it. And so I think that I have heard people kind of be like steered away from that. And so, yeah, I can understand that situation that you presented, Jack, and I appreciate that. So would you say that for a portion of EMDR or even brain spotting, like your first couple sessions would be more so a talk therapy type session, so you're getting to know each other, and coming up with like a treatment plan before starting the EMDR? Or how do you introduce that? Or like, what does that transition period look like?
Yeah. And this isn't the answer you'll like, but it is the answer in terms of it depends, right?
Okay.
Like it depends, because a client with let's say a single incident trauma, right? Like they were in a really bad car accident and they were hospitalized for weeks, almost past maybe, and and are still kind of they've gotten past like the physical hospitalization, but now they're afraid to get into a car, right? As opposed to someone like Jack's story, someone who has experienced ongoing interpersonal violence between someone that is a important relational figure in their life, and maybe they found themselves in that relationship because of previous relationships in childhood where they experienced or saw violence in their home, or or between their parents, or caregivers, or whatever, right? Those two scenarios, again, put very simply, as I for the purpose of our conversation, are both trauma, but the way that they will show up in treatment is completely different, because this person who had a single incident trauma may have had, for the most part, a fairly well attached relationship with their parents, not a ton of ongoing trauma in childhood, but this particular thing really rocked their world. Whereas someone who grew up around violence, who didn't have a stable attachment, a secure attachment with their caregiver, and then again found themselves in ongoing abusive relationships, those treatments are going to look very, very different. So in any, therapeutic relationship, yes, you're going to begin with kind of, talking about, why are we here? Why are we here? Why therapy? Why now? tell me, give me, help me understand, your story, where you come from, and how we got ourselves here today, right? And here to, that brought us to this moment of us beginning therapy together. So yeah, there was a couple layers to your question, but I'm trying to kind of trying to catch up a little bit with it. So help me understand help me remember the other pieces of it. So they're going to look very different. Yes, there's going to be some talking involved with EMDR. There's intentional resources, we call them, the resource building as part of the protocol.
Okay.
With Brainspotting, we might start with a setup that comes from we're processing from a more calm, grounded, or neutral place, as opposed to like going for the activation, if that makes sense. So yes, right. These types of therapy, and I tell clients about this when we first start, they are much more intense than traditional talk therapy because of the reasons we've discussed. They access the different parts of the brain and body, right? Sometimes some of those, feelings that you once felt start coming up because they've been stored in the body, right? And so you're experiencing, the fear, the anxiety, the anger, whatever it is, the tingly feeling in your hand, your cheeks getting flushed, your heart racing. You're experiencing those things, in real time during EMDR and Brainspotting sessions, right? And so, yes, there is a level of preparation that happens in the form of talking, but the amount of time, our amount of sessions, back to the question. Okay, we're coming back around. Back to your session, or back to your question. It depends on the clients, on their circumstances and their story.
Okay. Yeah, that helps. And then it also helps that you mentioned there's a little bit of a structure when it comes to how to, I don't want to say pull that information or like lead them into that information, but it helps to understand that, because that's kind of what I was asking, is how you get from one point of talking into the actual like action of the therapy. So thank you.
Yeah, one thing I'll know about both EMDR and Brainspotting as well is that clients don't have to retell certain details or aspects of the trauma. There are going to be some parts, again, in talk therapy where like they'll have to kind of, give context to, to why we're here and we're doing therapy anyways. But in terms of like during the processing, like the act of talking through the details of the horrible things that have happened, you don't have to do that in EMDR or Brainspotting. A client can process internally because the brain is light years faster than the process of figuring out what to say in the thinky brain and then shooting it out for, out of the mouth for, for the clinician to, understand, right? And that's really not again, it's another piece about this is like it's not really as much the point that the clinician understands, what's happening in real time with the processing. It's that the brain is doing what it needs to do. So that's another thing of why clients really like, for trauma therapy, EMDR and Brainspotting, because you don't have to retell details that are really hurtful to think about and say out loud.
Thank you for that explanation.
Yeah, great questions. You guys are awesome.
I think we're going to go to the next slide. So we have a couple cultural responsive questions. So the first one is, how do you address the intersectionality of race, gender, and other aspects of identity in your therapeutic approach to ensure a holistic and inclusive healing experience for your clients?
First of all, I love both these questions so much because it shows, you all are my people anyways, being in your social work programs, that, you all, it tells that you are wanting to serve clients in this holistic way, in who they are, in the world that we live in. And so I appreciate these questions straight out the gate. You all are great for them. So one of the things is that we do here at my practice and Empowered Mind Therapy Center, and when I was a solo practitioner myself, is one of the first things to do is to create space for this conversation. And at the first point of contact, or the first point of the therapy relationship, which is an intake paperwork, right? There's been a lot of intake paperwork I've seen where there's no questions about race, gender, sexual orientation, immigration status, abilities, any of it, right? Which to me, I'm like, again, and to folks, because you're asking this question, it's like, we know that so much of what happened, of the context of the world that we live in, with privilege and oppression, and how all of it impacts our experiences of the world, and how our identities, are impacted, and how we experience ourselves and show up in the world are impacted, that this is really important. So one of the things that we do is make sure we ask directly as well as open-ended questions, just to get the client to kind of think about this, right? Like, think about it, because some clients never even thought about it, right? They're coming to therapy because they're struggling with their anxiety and their depression, and they might not realize, until they sit and think about it, that they're so freaking stressed at work because of all the microaggressions, because they're the only woman on the leadership team, or they're only person of color on this particular program committee, or whatever, right? And they start to think, okay, like that makes, I hadn't thought about it that way. So even in the first point of contact, having prompts and the intake paperwork that, give the client a chance to to think about it, right? Now, some might have a very good idea, and others might be like, I don't know, right? Like, and that's okay, right? You're just kind of introducing the idea. Now, the other thing you do is, okay, so we kind of introduce the ideas of, again, like, how do you identify racially, ethnically, culturally? How do you identify, we ask for pronouns, we ask if they have any disabilities, and then we have a list of questions, but also an open-ended question, that says, are there any aspects of your identity that you think are important for us to know, or that you think impact or intersect with your mental health, or the mental health struggles that you're experiencing at this time? Some clients, again, have no idea. Other clients say, yeah, my experience as a first generation, Mexican American, right? And my clients, my parents are, pressuring me to do X, Y, and Z because they sacrifice so much to come to this country. And I feel, that kind of thing, right? Like, it kind of gives them, the space to kind of freely think, right, about how the aspects of their identity, how they intersect, right, impact their mental health. I'm gonna stop there. Are any questions about this piece, and like how we ask it, like, upon the first kind of, again, contact with the client with an intake paperwork? Any questions about that? No, pretty straightforward. The next thing we do, again, this is all kind of part of the relationship building, kind of setting the tone, right? That, like, these are the things that we notice, that we care about, right? That we acknowledge are a part of the human experience, and that impact mental health. And so we address what's we address what's listed in our initial assessment. So, hey, I noticed that you mentioned that you're a first generation Mexican American, and that's something that's really important to you. Can you say a little bit more about, how you've noticed how that has impacted your mental health? I know you mentioned a little bit how, it plays out in your relationship with your parents, right? But you also said you're really stressed out at work or school. Have you noticed any themes in that? Just kind of like, asking a little bit. Again, we don't want to assume, again, because other clients, some clients are aware of, kind of really in tune with this. Some clients, maybe just don't simply have the experience that we're, that we might be wondering is there, right? And so, again, asking them for a little bit more information. But I think ultimately, something that's really important to set the tone in this is acknowledging my own intersectionality and in my own identity and the human that I am that shows up in the therapeutic relationship, and how that, will play its role and take up space in the work that we do together. So I'll say something like, as part of something, as part of, setting the tone for our relationship together, and again, the relationship that we have is arguably the most important factor in our work together. And we talked a lot about you, a lot of your identity, your experience, and I want to share a little bit with you about who I am and what I bring, to the room, what I bring, my experience, right? Not only as like a clinical professional, but who I am as a human. And I'll share, I'm a mixed race woman of color. My mom's Filipino, my dad is Mexican. I'm a first generation college student. I grew up from a working class background. I identify as straight, a cisgender woman, kind of give, again, like, kind of pieces of, who I am, so that I could say, yeah, we might share some similar experiences, but also there might be some things that I miss, my own blind spots, because of my own, privilege as, English being my first language, or being an able person, right? Or neurotypical person, right? Like there might be some things I miss, or even, whether or not we share the identity or not, so also naming those things, bringing in it to the room. I felt clients have really, really appreciated that, because again, we talked about like the power earlier, we talked about the power dynamic between therapist and client, right? In our field, and I'll kind of moving into this with our next question, we learn from a really Western concept, right? The field of mental health, the nature of therapy, the folks who we learn from are Freud, Carl Jung, Erik Erikson, right? Not to say that those gentlemen don't have wonderful things and didn't have wonderful things to contribute to the work, but they're from a very Western point of view, right? Like we've learned that, that there's limits to how much we can self-disclose, which there are. But, some of these folks might be like, cringing if they were to hear me say, tell you all, this is what I do, because it helps, I bring a piece of myself into the work, not only because of that power differential, but also because it names the different parts of ourselves that are happening in the room, right? And it contributes to the relationship that we have together, right? As therapist and client, so we can, have a shared understanding with each other moving into this healing work, right? So I'm going to start because I want to kind of go into the second question, but we have a hand.
But of course, it's me again. I love what you're saying, because I think acknowledging these things also normalize bringing this into this space and showing like, hey, I'm giving myself permission, so you may also, bring that into the space. And that's something that I've done with people. It's like, hey, when it's relevant, making sure that I'm acknowledging these things so that should they want to bring any part of themselves into the space, they feel comfortable. So naming it and saying, hey, I'm here to support all aspects of who you are and how you show up. And part of that is going to be based on your experience, your identity, really, because that's really at the root of everything. So I love how you really brought that in and explained that, because I think it's so critical. And also to your point about self-disclosure, yeah, of course, we're not gonna, come in here and tell everybody about all our dirty secrets or whatever. But at the end of the day, it is important to acknowledge who you are, because for me, before I even will work with someone, we need to have a meeting. We need to talk to make sure it's a good fit, because also like identity plays into a lot of things. And if I know I have a bias I can't get past, then I would not be a service to that client, and I'm not going to sign up to work with them. It just wouldn't be fair to them. It's not even about me, but I also recognize what I bring into this space. So I really appreciate you bringing all of that into your answer.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Oh my gosh. It's already 10:58. Oh my gosh.
That just flew.
It did.
Oh my gosh. I told you all I can talk into the end of time, but I feel like I was like restraining myself. Oh my gosh. Can I just say one thing about this last question here?
Of course.
Because I was starting to lean it. I was starting to get to it. I loved this question, and it had me thinking a lot, because at first glance it feels straightforward, but the word that had me really kind of mulling it over was the word, how do you ensure that therapeutic approaches are culturally sensitive and impactful to diverse backgrounds and experience the women of color that you serve? And the word ensure was the part to me that I was like, well, it kind of had me, and I already kind of started to allude to it a bit, right? Like that I think it's something that, that I don't know if we can ensure it because of the nature of, again, the field of which it was developed and founded on, right? Like, to me, it almost opened up to a door to another conversation around, how do we ensure culturally sensitive, impactful, diverse backgrounds in a field, in a context, in the world of therapy that is based in Western ideals, that is, only when not all our clients, have, have these experiences, and, and if we're talking about folks of color and how, their experiences, historical trauma and colonization, and that, continues, to impact communities all around the world and entire populations, as we know right now what's going on in the world. To me, I was kind of like, wow, this is a really big question. And so with an answer that I feel are like that, maybe it's a whole nother conversation, because I think it's an invitation to kind of to look at how we think about the field of mental health, of therapy, and who we learn from, and kind of keeping a critical eye, on how we are looking at our clients from the perspective that we are learning the field, in order to not pathologize, thinking of, a client being resistant, or maybe it's just like we haven't built trust yet, or thinking a client, I've been looking at the work of a Palestinian mental health leader who is totally turning the concept of PTSD upside down, because the word post, right, assumes that there's no longer trauma happening, but then what about the impacts of generations and beyond, right? Like, and so again, I wanted to just acknowledge that this is an awesome question, but the word ensure had me thinking, how, you all as developing, clinicians and social workers in the world, how you, continue to critically think about, the field itself and how you serve your clients within it.
And I want to say, Vanessa, thank you for your courage with naming atrocities. You never shy away from the position of equity for everyone. And I just wanted to share my appreciation for that. I just respect and love you so much.
Thank you. Mutual feelings.
Yes, we're so fortunate to have your time and just to be able to experience your wonderful energy. It just radiates, in everything that you're saying. So I also would like to extend my appreciation for you giving us, this part of yourself and your time, because you could have been doing lots of other things, but you have chosen to support us, and we really, really appreciate you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here again. Like I know already that you all are my people, and I'm someone that can talk into the end of time. And so I'm happy to do it. Thank you all so much for having me. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Clinicians for Cultures from the Align and Embrace team.
If you'd like to learn more about what steps you can take towards advancing your practice of cultural responsiveness, check out our website at alignandembrace.com and join our Clinicians for Cultures community. If you like our show, remember to subscribe and share with others who may benefit. Let's build solidarity among clinicians, because together we can revolutionize healthcare.